After years of oppression, the Assad regime in Syria has fallen in a stunning set of developments, leading to a global debate around what happens next. While people of Syrian origin, as well as the Syrian people within Syria, are celebrating, others are concerned about whether what follows could be even more alarming. I'm Barkha. You're with the Mojo Story. Our focus today is on the big global news that is unfolding, and that is the fall of Damascus and the Assad regime. Bashar al-Assad, according to reports, has fled to Moscow, seeking refuge in the arms of Vladimir Putin. But as his statues came down and prisoners in jails across Syria were released, leading to celebrations among the Syrian people, both within Syria and outside, and there can be no two views about the fact that he was a dictator, there is now a debate around what happens next. Under the outgoing president, President Biden, there were airstrikes that were launched on what the Americans called ISIS camps within Syria. Donald Trump, the incoming American president, however, said that we, as in the Americans, should stay far away from Syria's conflict. He argued that this is not America's war. New Delhi has had a very, very cautious response. The embassy remains open to help Indian nationals, but India has not taken a very categorical position one way or the other. The debate, as I said, is around what happens next. There are those who express concerns that Syria could go the way of Iraq or Libya. But there are others who say that just because there is uncertainty over what comes doesn't mean that this moment, a historic moment, should not be celebrated by the Syrian people. What has happened in Syria has wide ranging implications for the world order and also for security in what we call West Asia and the world calls the Middle East. Let me introduce our panel, a very distinguished panel of experts today. I want to welcome to the program General Atta Hasnain, who's of course a military veteran, has a very important column out on Syria in the Indian Express. I urge all of you to read it. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, veteran diplomat, is with us. Military veteran Group Captain Dr. Augustine Vinod is with us. Welcome to the program, sir. And joining us from the United States of America today is Kareem Rifai. Kareem Rifai is a Syrian American. He has a very interesting Twitter feed on the developments in Syria, and Kareem is a graduate student at Georgetown. Welcome, everybody. I think it's only fair that we give the first comment and the floor to Kareem to start with. What does this moment mean to a young man like yourself who lives in the United States of America, but who I saw on Twitter, you said your mother could finally think of going back home. What are your first thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and featuring a Syrian voice. It truly means the world. The war in Syria has been going on for over half of my life. My mother has not been allowed to return to Syria for the past 15 years. Both of her parents died during the war of natural causes, but we were unable to visit their graves because the Assad regime put her on a list for arrest for speaking out. So this past week has been absolutely stunning. A 14-year war ending in a week. Thousands of Syrians already trying to return. I don't know if you've seen the videos of the traffic jams from Turkey. It's an incredible moment, and every Syrian that I've spoken to is already talking about going home.
And I understand the great emotionalism of that sense of going home, but could you also speak to what this regime represented to people like yourselves who hadn't actually, I'm assuming you did not grow up in Syria, you grew up in the United States of America, correct?
I did.
And were you born in America?
I was. Both of my parents were born in Aleppo, and I was born in America.
So you've seen what's happened in Syria through the eyes of your parents and through the eyes of your mother. What does the Assad regime represent to a young man like yourself?
50 years of oppression. The majority of modern Syria has been under one Assad or the other, either Hafiz al-Assad or Bashar al-Assad. And it's impossible to connect with your heritage as part of the diaspora when your home country is a danger to you. I never thought about going back to Syria to visit. I've only been once in my life before the war. Arrest warrant against my mother, arrest warrant against my uncle. there was no way to connect with the Syrian side of my Syrian American identity. So, I saw it through the lens of my mom. As you said, I came home one day from school to images on my TV of bombs dropping on Aleppo. And it was truly an emotional disconnect, seeing my mom sobbing in tears as the sites that she went to growing up were being demolished in front of her eyes while we were sitting thousands of miles away without anything to do about it.
Yeah. Before I open this up for our experts from India, Kareem, I have a question for you. You've seen the commentary. There is genuine concern that while nobody is going to shed tears for the regime that has fallen, there is deep concern about what comes next. And we have seen this play out in other countries. I've personally reported when Tahrir Square movement led to Hosni Mubarak being ousted in Egypt, as well as the Gaddafi ouster in Libya. In Iraq, we've seen the fall of Saddam. These were all the falls of dictators, but what followed them was Islamists, was religious orthodoxy in power, and that comes with its own set of dangers. What do you say to that?
I think concern is valid. Outside actors are concerned and Syrians are concerned. And Syrians don't want to live in a caliphate. They want a plural democracy. Syrians of all stripes want to be represented in our government, and all Syrians want to be treated equally under the law. I think concerns are genuine. I would also say the international community shouldn't withdraw in this moment. Just because the war in Syria has ended doesn't mean that the international community doesn't still play a role in what comes next. There needs to be immense pressure on actors in Syria to implement a pluralistic democracy. Obviously, there will need to be a transitional government, but there should be immense pressure for elections to be held as soon as humanly possible once services are restored. And to reiterate, concerns are 100% valid, and those concerns should prompt the international community to put as much pressure as possible for a plural democracy to be implemented.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts. I can understand what a big moment this is, and I think you've shown a lot of sagacity and also recognizing the worries that may lie right ahead. Let's open this up now, General Hasnain. I know you have a piece out in the Indian Express. We'll pull that up on our screen in just a moment. What are your most immediate thoughts?
Well, my most immediate thoughts are, first of all, that I'm really surprised. I did speak on another show where I said that I got to know about the changes in Syria from the Doordarshan coordinator when he rang me up asking me for a program in the evening, and I said, what has happened in Syria? He said, well, the whole world has changed in Syria. And I somehow seem to be completely oblivious of it. It was that fast that it happened. I mean, I sometimes just wonder, with the kind of eavesdropping capability available, the intelligence, the surveillance, the eyes in the sky, everything which is there, the humanity is not in a position to be able to predict many of these events. And many of these things happen under the radar. No, our attention has all been on Gaza. It's all been on Lebanon. We've been looking at the supply chains moving from Iran into supplying the Hezbollah, etc. Not one moment could we think that there was something which was going amiss here, and that the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir Shams, were actually preparing itself, and it had that many more virtual soldiers available to them to be able to put together a military campaign which has been so successful. I mean, in a matter of 8, 9, 10 days, to defeat the Syrian army, which has been victorious all these years, to defeat virtually the IRGC of Iran, and on top of that, to force the Russians out, is something which defies all kind of logic. So that's my first thought when I look at it. Of course, then we rationalize and we look at the reasons for it. That is something different.
Yeah. Let's bring in Ambassador Dayal and Group Captain Augustine. Ambassador Dayal, Delhi's being very cautious. India's being very cautious. Bashar al-Assad has run to Russia by all accounts. How do you see our response? It is typical in a way of our measured diplomacy, but even so, is it we've seen Assad as someone who has worked for Indian interests while the Syrian people have hated him. So how do we walk this tightrope? Could we unmute Ambassador Dayal, please? Yeah, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
We will have to watch very carefully how events unfold within Syria. The Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, which has been in the forefront of the ouster of the Assad regime, has been blacklisted as a terrorist organization by the United Nations also. And although it has sent out messages which are very conciliatory to all Syrians, and while the ouster of the Assad regime has been welcomed by most Syrians, the fact remains that we will have to see how the new regime treats its citizens and how it interacts with the rest of the world. Frankly speaking, after the fall of Aleppo, we all felt that the ouster of the Assad regime will not be too far away, because the Hezbollah, which had been a very important supporter of Bashar al-Assad, had been weakened greatly because of the Israeli attacks. And it was not in a position to keep supporting Bashar al-Assad. And that has been a very important factor which expedited his departure and the takeover of the Damascus system by the Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, which incidentally means the liberation of the Levant. So it remains to be seen how the new regime will impact the situation in the wider Middle East region. I may mention that Iran stands to lose a lot, because Iran had a very close ally in Bashar al-Assad, and it was sending arms to the Hezbollah and also onwards to the Hamas through Syria. Immediately west of Iran is Iraq, and immediately west of Iraq is Syria. So it was the standard route for arms supplies by Iran to the Hezbollah and other proxies, including the Houthis. Now, there will be a severe problem because the HTS is not at all well disposed towards Iran. In fact, it sees Iran as an enemy because Iran had been propping up the Bashar al-Assad regime. It had supported it. Likewise, Russia is not perceived too kindly by the HTS. And of course, Assad has fled to Russia, but Russia has to try and salvage its two bases, its air base and its naval base. The position is not very clear. There have been some reports that the HTS has assured Russia that its bases will stay. So we are watching, India is watching very carefully how events are unfolding. We are trying to protect our community, which is very small. We have just about 90 people who are Indian citizens, and some of them are in fact working for the United Nations. But even one citizen needs to be protected. We are doing that. But as I said, the situation is unfolding so rapidly that we need to see how things shape out and what we need to do. But we have, I think, sent signals that we are open to have a relationship with whichever government takes power in Damascus. And we want the Middle East to become more stable, to become more peaceful, and any efforts we can make in that direction, we will be making.
Group Captain Augustine, I think picking up on Ambassador Dayal's point about the need for stability, is that what's going to happen? Because in your column, you argue that this is a double-edged sword. This is a double-edged sword, and it could create what you call regional chaos. What is your biggest concern?
Biggest concern, Barkha, is the way the entire country is arrayed. The majority is Sunni followers of Sunni Islam, whereas the entire, Basad family have been supported by or followers of a certain sect of Shia Islam called Alawite or Alawis. Incidentally, Alawis believe in Holy Trinity, which as per Islam, I don't think is permitted. So you have a minority, through oppression, through power, through what have you, and we have a victim sitting amongst us, who's victim to that kind of oppression. have ruled this particular area for half a century, since
Yeah.
1946.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
problem started with Barkha is pre-1946, is when you drew the line, the Sykes and one Frenchman, his agreement. So when you drew a line, and Middle East, we can probably talk about it, Spice-Picot agreement. Middle East, Barkha, in my opinion, and a couple of years ago, I discussed that with the General Athas Nain as well, is not designed for a Westphalian kind of sovereignty, uh, the way of governing things. You can't draw a line
Yeah.
in Middle East and say, this is mine, this is yours. It has never been. Thousands and thousands of years, this region has followed, something like a supranational, somebody controlling the state of affairs. And that is how the entire Middle East has been arrayed. Now you drew some line and you said, this is Syria and this is that, this is this. Problem started then. Now you have the majority Shia Sunni coming to power, and they will remain in power, and they are going to embolden the Kataib Hezbollah as well as the Hezbollah. Now emboldening Hezbollah is going to be a great problem for Israel as a state. That is something which was, willy-nilly created by American, a problem
Yeah.
which is going to bite Americans as times goes by. That is something probably Israel is trying to address by, demilitarizing. But this demilitarizing token hitting of air bases is not going to help, because the power that the Daesh or ISIS draws is from people and not from weapon. And you have now thousands of them who were now north of Aleppo, concentrated north of Aleppo, are now sitting in Damascus. So that is like the entire coastal region. It is going to be a
Yeah.
big problem unless it is addressed right now, as we speak. If not, it's going to spiral out of control.
Okay, so I want everybody to come in on this. I'll just read a couple of comments from our audience, very informed audience. Saurav Vishesh says, the HTS is not a rainbow coalition of ethnic groups. It's a Sunni terrorist outfit retrofitted as rebels. Flag-waving Sunni Syrians apart, the real concern is for the Alawis, the Christians and other minorities in Syria. There's another comment from Prasad. We've all found convenient ways to deal with military or religious dictators and monarchs while ignoring the people. With Iraq, Libya, and now Syria, it's time for us to think differently. I just want Kareem to come in on this point. The HTS isn't a rainbow coalition of ethnic groups. It's a Sunni terrorist outfit retrofitted as rebels. Is that a description you'd agree with, or do you think that there's a broad stroke here that you as a young Syrian American disagree with?
It's true that HTS is not a rainbow coalition of ethnic groups. No one will deny that HTS is a Sunni Islamist organization. But let's look at their words and then let's judge their actions. Right now, all we have are their words. So as they were taking over Syria these past 10 days, HTS would release essentially a daily message urging its fighters to leave minorities alone, leave Christians alone, conciliatory messaging, as the ambassador, I believe, stated. They got to Damascus with relatively very little bloodshed compared to the last 14 years of conflict in Syria. And so all I have to judge on are these past 10 days of action and their rhetoric. But moving forward, whether or not other nations decide to normalize relations with HTS or remove their FTO designation has to depend on their actions. If HTS is inciting sectarian violence, then absolutely, we should judge them by their actions and we should react accordingly. But as of right now, the message is conciliatory, but we don't know what that message is going to be in a week, 2 weeks, or in a month.
General Hassan, I think that's a fair point, given that let's take what happened in Afghanistan. I think much of the world said we'll never engage with the Taliban, and then just had to engage with the Taliban, because what are you going to do? Even though there is complete horror, for example, being inflicted on the women of Afghanistan by the Taliban. So, I think the rest of the world just has to adjust. Uprisings have to be left mostly to people. In this case, what has to be ascertained is while the people were oppressed by the Assad regime, will the people have a voice in whatever comes next? And the people has to include all people. In Bangladesh, we have an example. A woman accused of dictatorship goes, and then you see religious minorities being targeted. It's right next door to India. We have this example right now.
Very appropriate question, Barkha. There's no doubt about it. We go by models, we go by history. Now, if you look at the recent history of this area, what do we see? We see ISIS. ISIS also morphed primarily from the Al-Qaeda, right? It was a hand-me-down from al-Zarqawi to Baghdadi, and that's how it came into being. Before, as far as HTS is concerned, it's been morphed from al-Nusra, also from the Qaeda. So the ideology basically is the same. Now, does that mean that everything which has happened in the past is going to be repeated here? Not necessarily. As Kareem very correctly said, we need to watch it. For the moment, this organization does not seem to be showing those same colors which the ISIS showed at the early part of the ISIS campaign in 2014, if you remember. We saw the kind of atrocities which happened. This time, media and source reports so far have indicated that approximately 800 fatalities have happened, and not necessarily at the hands of the HTS. This could have happened very much in the fight between the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Syrian government forces, etc. So we need not pass any judgment. I think we need to give them time. We need to observe. And as you very correctly observed, what happened in Afghanistan, everything need not be absolutely bad. We can try and make efforts to make sure that before this system collapses, we try and make sure that a system is created which will ensure that it respects the secular culture and character of Syria. Syria, I'm sure Kareem will agree with me, is essentially secular, right through. And this is the only plus thing as far as Bashar Assad was concerned, where he continued to respect the secular nature and culture of Syria. And despite the efforts of a lot of people to bring in an ideological kind of a conflict into it, the Syrian Democratic Forces being supported by many Sunni factions, etc., it did not change that way. So the situation has to be watched. My last point on this, Barkha, is one element which we have not seen appear at all are the Iraqi militia. Now, this is a very strong militia, which we heard was moving towards Damascus at that time, has not enjoyed battle yet. This is the Shia-dominated groups, essentially Shia groups, right? Supported by Iran, supported by the IRGC. Now, when you got a combination of that kind, minus the Russians for the moment, I do think they need to be taken cognizance of for the fact that they are a very important entity in this. And therefore, we have not seen the end of things in Syria. This is going to be, to my mind, a bloody affair is still likely to emerge from what is happening at the moment.
Right. Ambassador Dayal, one thing that we haven't spoken about yet in this program is what the American response might be. Very different response from Biden and Trump. Biden is the outgoing president. The Americans strike what they call ISIS camps inside Syria. Trump releases a statement saying, this is not an American problem, right? Trump is going to be president in January. What variable is that going to bring into the equation, according to your understanding?
First of all, by the time Trump takes over, things will become clearer in Syria. As General Hasnain pointed out, there is the likelihood of some Iraqi forces mounting attacks against the regime in Damascus. So things are presently unsettled. But with almost over a month to go before Trump takes over, there is every likelihood that things will begin to take shape, and we will know how the current dispensation in Damascus is shaping out, how are its policies towards its own people, whether it is being conciliatory towards them, and also how are its policies towards other countries, especially in the region. Now, let me state that the Americans till now have been greatly concerned about the HTS, and that is why they have put the HTS on their list of terrorist organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And for
Yeah.
that matter, they have got the United Nations to do that also. So the Americans are not very inclined to take the HTS in the manner it wants to present itself. The HTS has been trying to send very conciliatory signals. It has tried to change its image. As General pointed out, the current chief, Muhammad al-Junaid, he was in the Al-Qaeda, and then he was in the Al-Nusra. So certainly the Americans look at him with some degree of suspicion, but he has tried to change his image. In a recent press interview, he wore a suit and tried to project that he had some westernized approach in regard to
Sure.
how he was going to shape his policies. So things remain to be seen. At the moment, they are unclear. But for a fact, the regime of Biden will try and hit some of the ISIS targets even more than it has already carried out 70 attacks on 70 bases. This is not going to stop. This pressure on the Syrians will continue. But as I said, by the time Trump takes over, things will be clearer. And Trump has said it's not our war. We don't want to get involved in it. So he will distance himself. Can he do so? Can he live up to what he's doing? What will be the pressures which will operate on him? But certainly, Russia stands to lose a lot. Russia had bombed some of the bases of the HTS. Iran is seen as enemy. So these factors might draw the Americans closer to the HTS, because my enemy's enemy is my friend. And since both Russia and Iran are considered unfriendly by the HTS, therefore that might draw the Americans closer. But let's see how things shape out.
And to Trump's advantage, Group Captain Augustine, this with a weakened Russia, a weakened Iran, these are all things that are advantage America, and Trump, who in any case wants to close or resolve the Russian-Ukraine war, he may have more occasion, in a sense, to move in that direction. But let's see, a month and a half is a long, or a month rather, is a long time in geopolitics, as we've seen. Very quickly, Israel. We haven't spoken about Israel. We've had reactions from Netanyahu. What is going to be the impact on Israel-Gaza, according to you, Group Captain Augustine?
Barkha, as usual, the past track record, like General has been talking about, past track record of the Islamic group, especially the Sunni Islamic group and the Shia Islamic group, have not enjoyed, so to say, inclusive kind of image world over. And this is one place, Syria is one place, like India, it's got, multiple people following multiple religion living in harmony for many years. Alawis, Christians, 10% are Christians, and the 3% are Druze. So how is this Sunni-dominated group is going to, first of all, include them? That remains to be seen. I will be pleasantly happy and surprised if that inclusivity comes into place. But there is no historic record of such thing happening. And like you rightly pointed out, Barkha, it is happening next door to us. How that inclusivity, and it was happening, and suddenly you see it vanished from the society completely, except probably a few handful of people who are batting for it. Nothing is happening in that front. But we also have, Barkha, another beautiful example of Taliban. Today, Taliban is not the Taliban that you and I knew. Taliban today, though oppressive within their boundary, they are trying to stay within their boundary and not meddle into others' affairs in other countries. They are sort of educated Taliban is what I would put it. And relative peace has prevailed. So will that model be applied here, and they will confine themselves to Syria and relative peace will prevail in Syria? If that happens, and I would think that 90% possibility that it will happen, except if, like General said, if the IRGC Shia group from Iraq, Mosul, that area comes into play, which I think Israel as well as US will resist. My larger concern is, I said it yesterday as well, today's Syria is probably tomorrow's Iran, and Trump hates Iran from the bottom of his heart, and you and I know that. So that is something that is going to foil.
Yeah.
But relatively, I think Israel, for a while, till these people regroup and what path that they will take, will probably remain peaceful unless Israel goes and attacks them, which is also a very high possibility because Israel can't sit tight. So that is.
Well, we have all sorts of
Kuladi marenge, then it will probably spiral out.
All sorts of variables. But as we close, if General Hasnain, you want to come in with a 30-seconder, and I'll give Kareem the closing word. General Hasnain?
Barkha, I think your question on Israel did not get fully answered. So let me just try and say the military part of it. It's going to be a huge military advantage to Israel. You see, with the supply chains from Iran having completely eroded to the Hezbollah, the northern front of Israel is now completely stable. It's not possible for Iran unless Iran uses only rocketry and missilery to start targeting Israel. So Israel now has the liberty of focusing entirely on the southern front and can now start looking for a military victory in Gaza, something which it was not seeking so far. So this is a major advantage for the American-Israeli combined. I think they will keep their hands off from the area of Syria for some time because I don't think the situation is going to get very clear. And at this time, anyone's enemy is the other person's enemy. And we have known for the last 10 years how the Levant has had multiple enemies all fighting against each other. So I don't think the Israelis are going to get themselves too involved in this whole tangle in Syria.
Well, that's a big statement that Israel will now look for a military victory in Gaza. So there are going to be repercussions well beyond the borders of Syria because of what has happened just now. Kareem, as a young Syrian with hope in your heart at this point, what would be your biggest fear? I think it's also important to talk about fear in this moment of hope for you.
My biggest fear is after all this fighting in 14 years that Syrians don't get to elect their own leaders. 100%, the international community has to keep the parties in Syria under pressure to implement the spirit of UNSCR 2254, which guarantees a democratic transition in Syria. All of this fighting would be for naught if Syrians at the end of the day don't live equally under the law.
I think that's very well said. You can't have traded one set of sort of oppressions for another set of oppressions. And that's the whole point. It has to be a Syrian story that includes all of the Syrian people. Otherwise, we fall back in the trope that we've seen in other countries where on the one hand, you have in quotes secular dictatorships, and then they're followed by, Islamist Democrats that leave out large sections of the people. So really a complex situation. Thank you very much. Could not have hoped for a better panel. To General Hasnain, to Group Captain Augustine, to Ambassador Dayal, and in particular to Kareem. May your hope and may your dreams come true, and may your mother be able to go back home to a peaceful, inclusive Syria. Thank you very much. Take care and see you all soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.